Hi, this is Mrs. Kidman, and in this video, we are going to be discussing the difference between radians and degrees and how we can find them. So what is the difference between radians and degrees, or what is radians? So what it is degrees measures the angle that's tilted. So you can kind of see it in this image over here. If this is where we're starting, our angle, or degrees, is going to be this measurement here, as opposed to a radian, which is talking about the viewpoint or the distance traveled. So a radian is going to be this distance. Now, what is a radian? Well, a radian is actually the proportion of the circumference of a circle compared to the distance traveled. So how much of the degrees are we going in that circumference? It's a proportion of our circumference of a circle. So how do we calculate radians? Well, the circumference of a circle, which is the proportion that it is calculated by doing 2 times pi times r. However, we know that in a unit circle, our radius is equal to 1, which means that the circumference of the unit circle is actually going to be equal to 2 pi. And so what it means is the radians is calculated by figuring out what is the proportion of that total circumference that we're looking at. And the way that we can do that is we can exchange between degrees and radians by looking at the proportion of a circle that the degree is. So for example, to figure out what a radian is, if we know our degree, we can divide it by 360 and then multiply it by 2 pi, and that will give us our radian. Similarly, if we're given a radian and we want to figure out how many degrees that is, we can take our radian, divide it by 2 pi, and then multiply that times 360. So let's take a look at a couple of examples here where we're going to do that. Then after we've finished doing that, what we will do is we will actually look at what all of those radians are in the unit circle. And that will be super helpful when it comes to understanding the unit circle a little bit more. So let's start by going from radians to degrees. Or should we start by going from degrees to radians? Let's start with degrees to radians because I think that one's generally a little bit easier. So what we're going to do to go from degrees to radians, as we saw on the previous page, is we're going to take our degree, divide it by 360, and then multiply it by 2 pi. And what we're going to do is we're not going to multiply it by 2 pi and change that pi to 3.14, but we're actually going to keep it as this symbol. So let's take a look at this first one. We've got 60 divided by 360 times 2 pi. Well, 60 divided by 360 is the same as 6 divided by 36, or 1/6 times 2 pi, which is going to be equal to 2 pi over 6, which is the same thing as pi over 3. Awesome, so 60 degrees is the same thing as pi over 3. Okay, let's take a look at this next example here, 36. So you've got 36 divided by 360, and we're going to multiply that times 2 pi. Well, 36 divided by 360 is actually just 1/10 times 2 pi, and that's going to be equal to 2 pi over 10, or pi over 5. Awesome, let's take a look at one last example here. Now notice how this one is a negative. So when we have a negative degree measurement, that means instead of going that counterclockwise way that we measure our unit circle, we're actually going clockwise the other way. So we're going to do negative 140 degrees. We're going to do it the same way, divided by 360 times 2 pi. So as we simplify this, we end up getting negative 14 over 36, and that simplifies into negative 7 over 18 times 2 pi. Well, that's going to be negative 14 pi over 18, and we can simplify that one more time to negative 7 pi over 9. And that's what that final radian is. So we can see that how we convert that is just following that process, taking our degree, dividing it by 360, then multiplying it times 2 pi. Now let's go the other way and figure out how we can go from radians to degrees. So before, we talked about how to go from radians to degrees. We take our radian, divide it by 2 pi, and then multiply that by 360. So let's take a look at pi over 3. So if I have pi divided by 3, and I'm going to divide it by 2 pi, what that really means is I'm taking pi divided by 3 and multiplying it by 1 over 2 pi. And so what happens here is my pi's actually cancel out, and I get 1/6. Then we multiply that times 360, and 1/6 times 360 is 60 degrees. And look at that. Pi over 3 is 60 degrees. Beautiful. So notice how we can go both ways. What about pi over 18? We're going to do the same thing. Notice when we divide, it's like flipping the fraction. So we've got pi over 18 times 1 over 2 pi, or divided by 2 pi. Our pi's cancel out with each other, and we end up getting 1 over 36. And when we do 1 over 36 times that 360, what we end up getting is 10. So pi over 18, or pi over 18 is equal to 10 degrees. Now let's take a look at this last one here. Notice how this one has both a number in the numerator and in the denominator. So what that means is our pi just won't immediately cancel into 1 over something. So when we end up multiplying by that 360, we're going to have to do a little bit more finagling there. So we've got our negative 7 pi over 2. We're going to multiply it by 1 over 2 pi. Again, our pi's cancel, and this ends up being negative 7 over 4. So then we need to take that negative 7 over 4 and multiply it by 360 and see what happens. As we do that, we end up multiplying that negative 7 divided by 4 times 360, and we end up getting negative 630 degrees. Now that is a degree measurement. That negative 630 degrees is actually going to be the same as negative 270. And so if we had our unit circle here, if I went negative 270, that means I go negative 270 to here. So it's actually the same thing, or it's in the same location. They're called coterminal with 90 degrees. So that is how we can go from one to the other. So with that in mind, let's then go from one part of our unit circle to the other. Let's change all of our degree measurements into radians and see what happens. So go ahead and pull out your unit circle, and let's go ahead and fill that in. Now you are more than welcome to do all of the math yourself if you're interested. I'm actually just going to go through and fill out the unit circle with those radian measurements so that we have it in our notes. But you do not have to, you can go back and calculate it yourself. These will not be calculated on this video. So as we saw previously, we saw that the 60 degrees is the same as, oh, that's no good. 60 degrees is the same as pi over 3. And so as we go back down, 45 degrees is actually the same as pi over 4. This is the same as pi over 6. When we go down to that 0 degrees is actually the same thing as either 0 pi or 360, which is 2 pi. We know that's all the way around. So then what happens with our other sides is 90 degrees is actually pi over 2. Then we go past pi over 2, and we get 2 pi over 3. We get 3 pi over 4, and we get 5 pi over 6. And then we can continue on with our circle here as we go halfway around our circle, because all the way around is 2 pi. Halfway is just going to be pi. And then we can come down into our next parts. This 210 degrees is going to be 7 pi over 6. Then we get our 5 pi over 4 and our 4 pi over 3. Lastly, we're going to end up coming over here to our bottom quadrant. This is going to be 3 pi over 2. Because we are 3/4 of the way around our circle, we have 5 pi over 3. We have a 7 pi over 4. And we have 11 pi over 6. Now, if you have any questions about how these numbers are, how we can get these numbers, we can definitely go over it. Please reach out. But that is how we find all of those values, is using the same process that we did here on this slide, where we said to go from degrees to radians, we can take that degree value, divide it by 360, and multiply it by 2 pi. I didn't do it to show you, but that is the process that we would follow. So that is what radians and degrees are and how they're related. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, but that is radians and degrees. We are going to talk about how we can use these radians and degrees in conjunction with the unit circle to find different values. So please check out the next video in which we cover that. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.